The morning a sheriff's deputy stood on my own porch and explained, kindly, that the man renting my spare room had more legal right to be inside my house than I did. That man was upstairs in my bedroom, and I could hear him walking around in it through the ceiling. I'm Warren, 43. I fix heating and air around Dayton, and after my divorce I did the thing half of Ohio does with a house that got too big overnight. I listed the spare bedroom to knock something off the mortgage. I want to say that up front, because everybody's first question is, why did you let a stranger in? And the answer is the most ordinary one there is. I needed the money and he had good references and he laughed at my dumb jokes about the Buckeyes, and that was enough. Honestly, that's all it ever takes, a guy who seems normal and pays the first month in cash. His name was Dell. Mid-50s, quiet, said he was between places after his own divorce, and for about a month he was the easiest person I've ever lived with. Kept to himself. Did his dishes. We'd watch a game sometimes and not talk, which is my favorite way to watch a game. I remember thinking I'd gotten lucky. And the thing is, I've thought a lot since about how the good month wasn't him being nice. It was him learning the house. The first thing that turned was small, the way it always is. I came home early one Thursday, sick, cut a job short, and Dell's truck was gone, but the deadbolt was thrown from the inside, which you can only do if you're in the house. And I stood on my own porch with my key not working against a bolt I hadn't set, and when I finally got in through the garage, the house was empty. He'd bolted it and left through the side. Like he'd forgotten, for a second, that it wasn't only his. I told myself he'd been careless. I didn't want the other thought. Then the month rolled over and I told him rent was due, friendly, and he smiled at me and said he'd been reading up, and that after 30 days he wasn't really a guest anymore, he was a tenant. And there was a whole process now, and did I know how long that process took in this state? He said it pleasant as anything, still doing his dishes while he said it. And I felt the floor of my own kitchen tilt, because he wasn't wrong, and the way he said it, calm, rehearsed, told me he'd known this the day he moved in. The good month had a purpose. He'd been waiting out a calendar. I called the police that first night, and they came, and they were sorry, and they told me exactly what Dell already knew. It was civil. He had a mailing address here now, he had residency, and I could not put him out, I could not change the locks on him, I could not shut off his power, I could not touch his stuff, without handing him a lawsuit that would cost me more than the house cleared in a year. The deputy actually lowered his voice and said, off the record, "Man, and then he didn't finish it, because there was nothing to finish. There was no version where I made the man leave. He lived there now. In the room I'd shown him with my own hand. And once he knew I knew, he started to spread. That's the only word for it, the way a man who pays for one room decides the whole house is up for negotiation. His coffee mug moved from his room to a permanent spot by my sink. His mail stacked on my counter. Then one evening I came home and he'd moved my recliner 6 feet across the living room and put his own folding chair in the good spot in front of the TV, the spot I'd sat in for 9 years, and shoved my chair into the corner like it was the guest now. I moved it back. Next day it was in the corner again. We never said one word about it. That was the whole conversation, a chair going back and forth across a room, a man measuring exactly how much of my own house I'd fight for, and learning, a little more each day, that a guy who fixes furnaces and just wants his quiet life back will fight for a lot less than you'd think. I tried once to do it clean. I found a mediator, paid $200 I didn't have, and sat across a rented table while a tired kind woman tried to broker my own house back to me from the man living in it. And Dell was perfect in that room. Calm. Reasonable. Sad about the whole misunderstanding. He agreed to everything out loud and signed nothing that held, and then he drove home ahead of me and was standing in my kitchen making tea when I walked in, and I understood the meeting had just been one more place for him to show me he'd win. On the way out he'd asked me, friendly, for my lawyer's name, so his guy could call my guy. He didn't have a guy. He just wanted me to know that he knew mine. So I started lying awake for him, and I'm not proud of the shape my life took. I'd lie there in the dark with my own door locked, listening to my house get used by somebody else. Because around 2:40, most nights, it started. The give of the third stare, the one that always gave. Then the slow sounds of a man moving through my downstairs with no lights on, a man who knew it too well by now to need them. The long creak of my recliner taking his weight, him lowering himself into my chair in the dark. The soft roll of my side table drawer opening and closing, unhurried, going through the mail and the spare batteries and the nothing worth stealing just to have gone through it. Some nights the tap ran. Once I heard the TV come on low and then off again, like he'd thought better of it. And me at the top of the stairs behind a door I'd started locking, lying still, not going down, because I had run clean out of things to say to a man the law said could sit in my chair at 2 a.m. if he felt like it. I lay there and listened to him try my whole downstairs on for size, night after night, and I never once went down, because going down meant finding out what I'd do about it, and I already knew the answer was nothing. That's the sound I'll be hearing when I die. Not a scream. A drawer, opening slow, in a house that was mine. The cinematic part, the part that made me sell, came a week later. He left for a few hours and I did the thing I swore I wouldn't, and I went into his room, and it wasn't my life I found laid out in there, it was his plan. On the little desk was a printout off some website, a tenant rights guide, and he'd gone through it with a yellow highlighter, and the line glowing yellow was the one about how after 30 days a guest becomes a resident and can't just be put out. Under it was a cheap wall calendar, and he'd drawn a small neat X through every single day since he moved in, counting them off, and the 31st day had a careful circle around it, and past that circle the X's just kept going in the same patient hand. He hadn't been living in my spare room. He'd been running out a clock he started the day he shook my hand, waiting for a number he'd highlighted before he ever set a bag down in my house. The good month was never him settling in. It was him serving the 30 days that turned my house into a thing he could keep. I'd like to tell you the law fixed it. It didn't, not really, not for a long ugly stretch of months and lawyers and a court date. What matters is I left. I paid a man to leave my own home. I took an apartment across town and let the process grind, and the day I finally signed the place away, cash for keys, paying a man to hand back a house I'd owned for 9 years, he shook my hand in my own doorway and told me, friendly, to take care of myself. I don't rent anything to anyone anymore. But that's not the part that stuck. The part that stuck is the circle around the 31st day, the patience of it, and the sound of that drawer opening slow beneath me, night after night, while I lay upstairs behind a locked door and did nothing about a man settling into my chair in the dark. Because a burglar wants your stuff and he's gone by morning. Dell didn't want my stuff. He wanted the house, and to get it he only had to be patient and let a calendar do the work, because the law said he could stay and I was the one who had to go. I still have the deed. My name on it, the house I don't live in, his name on nothing, and he's the one who slept there. That's the part nobody warns you about, that a place can be yours on every piece of paper there is, signed and filed and paid for, and still not be yours at all.
I'd been renting the little back unit to her for about 3 weeks before I understood she'd been coming into the main house while I was at work. And I understood it because I came home one afternoon and my own bed had been slept in. The covers pulled back on the side I don't sleep on, and a strand of her hair on my pillow. I'm Marin, 31. I work as a vet tech outside Boise, and the back unit was my grandmother's, a little mother-in-law suite behind the main house, its own door, its own everything. When Gran passed, I couldn't sell the place, too much of her in it, so I stayed in the main house and rented the suite to help cover things. That's the whole innocent setup. A separate little apartment, 40 feet across the yard, and a lock on the door between us that I genuinely believed meant something. Her name was Colette. Late 30s, soft-spoken, paid 3 months up front, which I now know is the upfront money that makes you not run a real background check, because who does that? Who cheats you after handing you 3 months? For the first couple weeks, she was barely there. She did her shopping at the Fred Meyer on the way home from wherever she went, and kept to herself. Honestly, the ideal tenant. I'd see her light out back. We'd wave. And then the small things started. and every one of them had an explanation I reached for, because the truth was too strange to hold. The throw blanket on the back of my couch would be folded when I'd left it in a heap, and not folded any old way, folded in the particular fussy thirds my grandmother used to fold it. A window I keep shut for the AC would be open 2 inches. Once, a book I was reading was on the arm of the couch instead of the floor by the couch where I'd left it. Moved, just moved, the kind of thing you can't even swear to. I told myself I was tired, I was grieving, I was misremembering my own small habits. The lock on the connecting door still worked. I checked it and it worked. I did not yet understand that Gran had given a spare key to that suite to a neighbor a decade ago, and that the suite key and the connecting door key were, in a house that old, the same simple key. And that Colette had found it in a drawer 40 feet away because she had all day, every day, alone, behind my house to look. There was one afternoon before the bed that I only understood afterward. We were talking over the fence rail, polite, nothing, and she asked me, soft and sad-faced, how my mom was handling the chemo. And I went cold in the sun, because I had never told her my mother was sick. I hadn't told a single person in Boise. It was a Montana thing, a phone thing, a me crying in the car in the clinic lot thing. The only place that news existed anywhere near that property was on the notepad by my landline in the main house kitchen, where I'd written the oncologist's number and the dates in my own hand. That's where she'd read it. She asked about my mother's cancer like a kind neighbor, over a fence, and let me watch her know a thing she could only know from standing in my kitchen reading my counter, and she wanted me to feel it land. I said fine, thanks, and I could not make my voice work right, and she smiled and went back inside my grandmother's suite like nothing. The bed is what broke the spell. I came home early on a Wednesday, and I felt it the second I walked in, that wrongness in the air of a room that's been occupied, warmth, a smell that isn't yours. And my bed, made on my side, pulled back on the other, and the hair. I stood there for a long time. And then I did something I still don't fully understand. I checked the closet, because I had the sudden animal certainty that I needed to know if she was still in the house, and she wasn't. But 2 of my grandmother's cardigans were off their hangers and folded on the shelf wrong, handled, and I backed out of my own bedroom like the floor was ice. I went out back and I knocked and I asked her, straight, shaking, if she'd been in the main house. And Colette looked at me with this calm, almost sad patience, and she said, Marin, I live here. Not, I'm sorry. Not, no. She said I live here, and she let it sit, and I realized she didn't mean the suite. She meant the property. She meant all of it. She'd paid her 3 months and read the same tenant laws they all seemed to find, and she knew that I could not simply throw her out, that she had a residency now, and in her mind the line between the suite and the house had quietly stopped existing. And I was the roommate who didn't understand the arrangement yet. I had a locksmith rekey the connecting door the next morning, both deadbolts, brand new hardware, and I paid him extra for same day because I could not spend one more night behind the old lock. And I felt safe for exactly 2 days. On the 3rd I came home, and the new key worked fine and every door was locked and right, and on my kitchen table, folded neat in the dead center where I could not miss it, was my grandmother's blue cardigan, the one I keep in a cedar chest in my bedroom. She hadn't broken the new lock. I still do not know how she got in that day. She just wanted me to understand that a new lock was a thing that happened to her, not to me, and she left my own grandmother's sweater on my own table the way a landlord leaves a note. The scene I can't put down happened 4 nights later. I woke up a little after 3 with the specific certainty that someone in the house was awake, and I came out of my bedroom and the little light over the stove was on, low, and Colette was at my counter in the dark making tea. In my kitchen. At 3 in the morning. Dressed, calm. The kettle she'd found in my cupboard, a mug off my shelf, moving around my kitchen with the easy familiarity of a woman in her own home. When she saw me, she didn't startle, and she didn't explain. She just tilted her head a little, the way you'd look at a pet that wandered in, and asked if I wanted a cup. And I stood there watching a stranger offer me tea in my own kitchen in the middle of the night like I was the guest in it. And then she rinsed her mug and walked back through my dark house to the connecting door like she knew every step of the way, because by then she did. I left that night. My own house. I put shoes on and I drove to my sister's, and I did not go back without a locksmith and a friend the size of a door. And I did everything you're supposed to, the report, the process, and it went the way it goes, slow and civil and useless in the short term, and eventually she left the way they leave, on her own schedule, for her own reasons, having decided the well was dry. I got a doorbell camera after, and there's a clip I keep, from a day I was at work before I ever knew, that shows her crossing the yard and letting herself in my front door with a key, casual, midday, a woman going into her own home. That's the frame I'm stuck with. Not a break-in. No force, no drama. A calm woman walking into my house in the daylight, because in her mind it had become hers, and the law, for a while, agreed with her more than it agreed with me. I kept Gran's place. I couldn't let it go. It was the last of her I had, and I told myself that changing every lock in it made it mine again. But here's the thing I've never said out loud. Colette left the way they leave, on her own schedule, and I've stopped letting myself finish the thought about how many copies of my keys a woman had time to make in 3 months of afternoons alone behind my house. So I live in my grandmother's house, and I've changed the locks twice more since, and I still, every single night, wedge a chair under the handle of the connecting door like a child, because a lock is a thing I believed in once, and she taught me exactly what one is worth. Some nights I come home and a cushion is turned the wrong way, or a window's open an inch, and I tell myself it's me, I'm tired, I'm misremembering my own house. That's the part that doesn't end. She's gone. But she took my certainty that I'm ever alone in here, and she never gave it back, and I don't think she ever meant to.
So I told a guy I worked with he could crash on my couch for a week while he got back on his feet, and 11 days later I put my key in my own front door after a shift and it didn't turn. Because he had changed the locks on my house while I was at work, and through the window I could see my furniture rearranged and him stretched out on my couch with his feet up watching my TV, and he lifted one hand and waved at me. Let me back up. I'm Wade, 37, I run a shift at a distribution warehouse outside Macon, and the guy was Trav, worked the same floor, seemed fine, told everybody a hard luck story about a breakup and a lease falling through. And I've always been the one who helps. My mama raised me to be the one who helps, and honestly, I had a couch. A week, he said. Just till payday. And I said, sure, man, because that's who I am, or who I was before this, and I want you to understand that the whole trap runs on exactly that, on there being a guy like me who has a couch and says sure. The first few days were normal. Then Trav stopped going to work. Just stopped showing up. And when I asked, he got vague, and his stuff started spreading. A duffel became a dresser drawer became the bathroom counter, and the week came and went and I brought it up gentle and he got this look, this flat little look, and said he'd looked into it and I couldn't just put him out. He had mail here now. He'd made sure of that, a couple of envelopes with his name and my address, and that made him a resident. And residents have rights, and did I want to do this the hard way? In my own living room. 11 days in. I made the calls, and got the answer everybody in this story gets, civil matter, file and wait, months. But here's the twist mine had. 2 days after that call, while I was pulling a double, Trav changed the locks on my house. And when I stood on my own porch that night with a key that fit nothing and called it in, the deputies looked at his mail and his residency and my deed, told me the same civil matter line, and left. I slept in my truck outside my own paid-for house while the man who'd been there 11 days slept in my bed. I'm going to tell you the ugly middle fast because it's not the point. It was months. It was a lawyer I couldn't afford. It was watching him through my own windows living my life, using my kitchen, and once, a woman I didn't know coming and going, and me not able to do one legal thing but wait and pay. He knew I was watching. That was the game. He'd wave. He left my mail stacked on the porch for me like a landlord being courteous to a tenant, my mail, on my porch, and I'd pick it up and get in my truck. And the longer he won, the more deliberate the taking over got. I could see it through my own front window like a slow eviction where I was the one being evicted. My dishes went into boxes on the kitchen floor, his went up in my cabinets, my grandmother's plates stacked on the linoleum like I was the one moving out. He parked in my spot in the drive and left me the street. One evening I watched him carry my grill, the grill I'd saved for, around the side of the house to the back where I couldn't see it from the road, claiming it, moving it out of my sightline the way an animal drags a thing off to eat it. And there was not one legal thing I could do but sit in my truck and write it all down for the lawyer, a running inventory of my own life being repossessed, item by item, by a man I had known for 11 days. The one thing that kept me sane was the woman across the street. Miss Odella, 70-something, she'd known me since I bought the place, and she'd watched the whole thing out her front window, a stranger's face in my windows, my truck parked at the curb every night with me in it. One morning she came out in her robe and told me she'd been writing it all down, every date, every time she saw him come and go, in case I ever needed somebody to stand up in front of a judge and swear this was my house and I was the one sleeping in the street. I about cried right there on the sidewalk. For 4 months she was the only proof I had that I wasn't crazy, that the world still knew whose house it was, even while the law acted like it couldn't be sure. The night it turned physical is the night the paper finally cleared and I had, at last, the right to enter my own home with a deputy, and Trav knew it was coming, and he did not go quiet. He'd barricaded the back, and when we came in the front he came off the couch with a kitchen knife, my kitchen knife, and I got a 6-inch cut along my forearm getting a chair between us before the deputy put him down on my own floor, and the thing I keep seeing isn't the knife, it's what was on the wall behind him. He'd hung things. In my house. He'd put a framed picture of himself on my wall and moved my mother's picture into a drawer. I found it later in a drawer, face down. He hadn't just refused to leave. He'd redecorated. He'd been turning my house into his house one object at a time, the way you'd nest, and the framed photo of a man I'd known from a warehouse floor smiling on my living room wall over my furniture is the single worst thing I have ever seen in a place I paid for. He got arrested, that night, finally, for the knife, not for any of the rest of it. None of what came after gave me back the 11 days, or the 4 months, or the version of me that used to say sure, man, to a guy with a hard luck story. And here's the part that keeps me up. When I finally got the house back and started putting it right, I found my mother's picture where he'd left it, face down in a drawer, and I sat on the floor with it in my lap and understood he hadn't been squatting in my house. He'd been moving into my life, and he'd gotten far enough in to take my mother off the wall and hang his own face where she'd been, and no key I could cut would ever fully undo the 11 days I held the door open and said sure. I kept my house. People say that like it's the happy ending, you kept your house. But I changed the locks myself, alone, that first night back, and I sat on my own floor where the deputy had put him down, and I understood I would never again be the guy my mama raised, the one who helps. And that's a thing he took that no court gives back. My mother's picture is back on the wall. I straightened it 100 times that first week and it still doesn't hang the way it used to, or maybe I just can't look at it the same, knowing how easy it came down. Knowing it came down because I held the door open and said sure to a stranger with a sad story. I don't say sure anymore. That's what a week on the couch cost me. Not the house. The sure.